Australia, and given his infectious enthusiasm, you probably convinced yourself he had a good time. So today, as Jeff said, Andrew will update on progress for the 2020 tourism industry potential and TA's plans for the year ahead. Please welcome Andrew to the stage.
G'day everyone, it's great to be here at the second conference, and it's interesting to see 60% of you weren't here last year, so that's great. Maybe the people, 99% of people who said they'd come back were telling some fib, but it's great to have 40% of you back and 60% of new people. As Ellen said, I want to sort of build on some of the themes that both the Minister and Jeff has raised, and talk a little bit about what we've done so far since we launched the 2020 potential, and also about the year and the years ahead. And that will be what I want to talk about today. There we go. So the potential, 1 year on, the next year, including what Jeff just spoke about, the next phase of the marketing, demonstrating world's best in Australia, as any good brand custodian should do. The focus on Asia, the need to up the ante, our engagement with airlines, a little bit about attracting investment to continue to improve the product, as again Jeff outlined, and then a bit of a summary. You'll all, or many of you will see this graph and hopefully know it. In November last year we talked about scenarios for growth in terms of, at best case scenario, doubling the economic value of tourism from $70 billion in overnight spending to $140 billion, and scenarios everywhere from current trend of about $108 billion up to $140 billion. And what do we need to do that? And as Jeff said, I think the Minister has really embraced the supply side debate, and there's much more mature conversation around that and much more action in that space. And we've also looked very closely at our role in creating demand and how we can be even better at that. But some of the interesting points, I think, is that you'll see that at the moment domestic tourism is still 72% of all spending in Australia. By 2020, the prediction is that it'll be more likely that international will be 45% of the spend and domestic 55% of the spend. So the greater growth will come from inbound markets, and the greatest part of that growth will come from Asia. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So 1 year on, we've had growth in inbound, and we've had modest growth in domestic, and we're going to track it all the way through over the next decade. Just looking at the last year, it has been the story of two worlds. I guess the far world, the Western world, the UK, Europe, is still coming out of its economic malaise and maybe going back in it, and I think David Scales will talk a bit about that later on today. They have been absolutely impacted by the macroeconomics. There is low consumer confidence, which doesn't augur well for outbound travel. And our job in those markets is to actually continue to kick and bite and scratch and get market share, do our best in a tough market. But the other world has been the Asia Pacific, the world in which we live, where we are in the same time zone. We are a one-stop flight from these destinations, and we are short or medium haul travel. So the benefits and the opportunities are much greater. And there's been some strong growth, with China the standout, 27% growth in visitor numbers off the back of 24% growth last year. And as the Minister outlined, more aviation capacity coming online. But also double-digit growth from India, from Malaysia, from Singapore, from Indonesia, which is really growing again for Australia. And also smaller growth, 6-7% for New Zealand, but off big numbers. They've all stopped a little bit at the moment. There's something going on in their country, I'm not sure what it is, but they're not travelling a lot at the moment. We saw terrific growth to the year ended June 30. And in Australia, positive signs. The dollar value of the growth wasn't there, but we saw a 4% growth in the number of trips to the year ended June. And we saw an 8% growth in the June quarter. And looking at the people who were in the room from Queensland, I think, talking to the operators up there, certainly Easter and winter was a lot better than it was last year, and in fact a lot better than it was in the last 3 years. So maybe signs of growth, signs of life, signs of recovery for the domestic market. As I said, we built this 2020 potential with three main phases. The next 4 years is about building our capacity to do better. It isn't just about ad campaigns. We have to make sure that we have, the regulatory environment, the investment environment, the aviation access environment that can get people to and through our country, as well as the best possible marketing distribution. And we're 1 year into a 10-year journey, and we'll continue to look at it, update it, tweak it, and hopefully continue to get it right. In Tourism Australia's case, we've certainly, as an organisation, embraced the competitive nature of the 2020 potential. That's what drives us now, and it is about being competitive. It's about holding or gaining share in these markets. It's about doing better than the other guys who are trying to get the same business we're trying to get. Jeff just said 130 countries now in China with approved destination status, 180 national tourism organisations operating in the UK alone. It is a tough, competitive world, and this 2020 potential drives Tourism Australia to be as competitive we can be, but in partnership with our industry and the people that we work alongside with. As Jeff said, we launched the There's Nothing Like Australia campaign at ATE in Adelaide in May 2010, and it's been very successful. It's rolled out in 29 countries around the world. We have more than 180 partners on board. It's well accepted, and the numbers in terms of consumer engagement are strong, quite outstanding really, and I think it is a platform for the next decade. I think Tourism Australia made a lot of mistakes in the previous decade by being inconsistent. There's Nothing Like Australia is our line, it is our strategy in the line for the next decade, and it's one that the industry is embracing and that we'll work with. There'll be iterations creatively, but that is our concept, that is our line, that is our marketing campaign for the next decade. Tourism Australia is also, we've worked hard internally to align our resources to the strategy, and you'll see some new faces around the place. People like Simon Westaway from Jetstar, Craig Davidson, former CEO of Anthology. We've kept some great people, Nick Baker and Francis Ankita and these guys. So we're building a team that I think is commercially savvy and capable. And the big instruction we have is we've got to be able to engage with you guys to work together to present that one voice to the world. The China 2020 strategy, launched by the Minister last June in Cairns, has been a great document, a great thought starter around how do we build on the great work that's already been done in China. And you're going to hear from former Ambassador Jeff Braby in a minute, who'll build on that potential and what Australia as an industry needs to do. And I think just generally there's this new energy and competitive focus and great collaboration, you know, working with the Department, across government in Australia and across states and territories. We're getting there. A lot of work to do, but that's the aim. So the year ahead. As Jeff said, we're going to look at really upping the ante in our marketing. World's best in Australia. Any brand the world over puts its best foot forward, demonstrates what's most compelling about the product or experience. And Tourism Australia and the Australian tourism industry should be no different. And that will mean that There's Nothing Like Australia will take a step up and we will show off the best stuff, the stuff that is so appealing that people just can't deny it. That's going to be a big thing to work through. We will use the most distinctive images of our country, which creates a halo effect for everyone. I think anyone the world over who sees this stuff will want to go there, and that's the aim. And then our job, I guess, is to join the dots with the industry to make sure that they actually can turn up. The big key for us is differentiating from our competitors. There's Nothing Like Australia really invites you to prove that. Why is there nothing like Australia? The world travels to experience difference, so for goodness sakes, as a sector, we need to differentiate ourselves through these world's best experiences and really prove there's nothing like Australia. And as both the Minister and Jeff outlined, through the best mediums and channels, I'm really proud of the work that we're doing in the digital and social media space. It is a competitive battleground, and I think it's a competitive advantage for the tourism and travel sector. So we are working really hard to make sure we are, as I say, where the eyeballs are, making sure that Tourism Australia and the Australian message is in those places. And there's a continued focus on advocacy. We have a brand and a message, but get other people to tell your story for you. It's much more powerful. And there's a grassroots advocacy through things like Facebook or Weibo, which is the Chinese microblogging, where consumers are telling your story as powerfully, if not more powerfully, to their friends and relatives on your behalf. And there's high-end advocacy, high-impact advocacy. Oprah was an example. Using the YouTube Symphony last year was an example. Big impact advocacy where well-known celebrities and people tell our story for us and resonate with consumers that they appeal most to. And then there's the speaking with one voice. And the concept is that There's Nothing Like Australia is Australia's campaign, and it can be orchestrated and curated with the help of the states, the territories, airlines, and the Australian industry. And we really have to get into that zone, back it, embrace it, and do that job much, much better. The other thing I wanted to hit on was this shifting of resources and focus on Asia. Look, in the short to medium term, the UK and Europe and the Americas remain very, very important in the long term for Australia. But at the moment, they're not going to grow in a real hurry given the macroeconomics of those markets. Our job in those markets is to fight for share, and you can rest assured that we understand the value of those markets, and that we are going to hang in there and work hard to gain share against those competitors. That's our job. But in this region, with growing economies, strong consumer confidence, it's a job about, make hay while the sun shines. There is much bigger opportunity in this Asian region, which we sit on the doorstep of, and we need to put more resources and more effort into those markets. China, we have the 2020 plan. Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, India, I want to touch on in more detail in a moment. But also watch this space, Vietnam growing, Brazil growing exceptionally well, and Australia needs to be at the forefront of those places to make sure we get a head start on other destinations as those countries start to travel more and more outbound. Our role is to create demand according to market circumstances, and market circumstances say to us at the moment that we need to focus very heavily on Asia without losing sight of those great traditional Western markets which provide great yield and great dispersal to our country. But you'll see a shift in focus, put more effort and resource in where we can make the biggest difference. The other role I believe Tourism Australia should play is to lead on opportunity, and that is things like India. How do we really capitalise on what will be one of the most massive outbound markets in the world in the next decade? Places like Brazil and getting back into Indonesia, where Australia was pretty strong years ago, but it's really starting to grow for us again. So in terms of India, we want to have a good look, as we did with China, and quietly work with you on developing a really strong 10-year plan for our industry to capitalise on what they predict will be a 50 million person outbound market over the next decade. It's the biggest English-speaking country on earth, 1 billion people. Australia at the moment gets 145,000 packs, a mix of students, visiting friends and relatives and leisure. And we're about 4.5% of all the long-haul travel, where you have to travel outside of the region and beyond. So how do we actually maintain and grow that share over the next decade? That's what this 10-year plan will look at. It's a young audience, 62% of people under the age of 26 years old. They are adventurous, growing middle class. They want to put travel in destinations like Australia on life's resume. So make sure that we are really spending some time, effort, money and human resources in that market. The 10-year plan will really look at building brand Australia in that market, particularly through the eyes of people that can tell that story best. Often we use a campaign, Namaste, at the moment, which is through the eyes of well-known Indians who are telling Indians why Australia is powerful. Building our distribution, we have about 2,000 Aussie specialist agents built throughout India, and let's grow that, grow into the second-tier cities, and actually steal a march again on the competitors. Access, aviation. Most Indians at the moment come over ports such as Singapore, Malaysia and Bangkok, and eventually demand will dictate that we get some more direct non-stop access. And the Australian experience, are we ready? Do we have the right food, cultural welcome and understanding of the Indian consumer? So a 10-year plan to get done by early next year, working with the industry to really capitalise on India over the next decade. Another role Tourism Australia is much more heavily playing is strong engagement with the airlines, really supporting the airlines to grow profitable capacity. There are plenty of seats available that we're not filling, and our job, we think, is getting alongside the airlines to fill seats in downtimes and to actually improve demand so that demand and capacity will grow. Also new route support. A good example will be China Southern flying 3 times daily in Perth. Working with Stephanie Buckland and Tourism Western Australia with the airport in Perth, we're right alongside them to hopefully make sure that that route works and that that route grows and expands and that Western Australia gets direct inbound access from China. And I think there are opportunities with other regional ports such as Cairns, such as Adelaide, such as Broome, for direct inbound air capacity, and as Tourism Australia wants to work alongside the state, the territory and the region, the airports to do that. And I think the other thing we should do really well, and we are starting to work on through Craig Davidson, is actually building this network of Australian airports and states who are focused on trying to attract this capacity, and we should get alongside them and help them build the demand for these routes. Just in terms of where the growth's coming from, I won't labour on these. You can get this stuff on tourism.australia.com at a later date. But this is just the rise and rise of China's capacity into Australia. And China Southern, you can see, really leading that, but also Air China, China Eastern, Qantas, and you've got carriers such as Jetstar, Singapore Airlines, low cost, Hong Kong Airlines, Cathay. There's a lot of capacity, a lot of opportunity, and it's another good reason to focus on a market like China. The other big growth obviously has been through the Middle Eastern carriers, and you can see there again with Emirates, Qatar, Virgin's tie-up with Etihad and Etihad itself, that there's great growth coming through the Middle East onto many destinations in Europe and beyond. So finally, on attracting investment, I won't say a lot about this other than we're working really hard through the department to engage with Austrade, to find those people globally who are interested in helping building a more appealing Australia of tomorrow. Australia is a massively appealing investment destination, and we're going to work with Austrade to build a prospectus of opportunity in Australia to demonstrate to these people where they could actually put their money to help us build that more appealing Australia of tomorrow. And we'll be ready for some kind of announcement or more discussion about that by early 2012. So look, in summary, it's been a busy year, and the Minister and Jeff have pointed out the challenges very succinctly. But from a Tourism Australia point of view, we'll unashamedly be an optimist and a competitive optimist about our industry, and we'll always put the best foot forward. We do want to take our marketing up a notch. We do want to demonstrate world's best in Australia unashamedly and well. We want to compete as hard as we can against other destinations, trying to pinch our visitors. 2020 is a decade-long plan. We've made the initial steps. We've engaged, I think, with a lot of people who want to continue to engage with you. I do think the industry is on track in year one. I do compliment Minister Martin Ferguson for shifting the discussion and the debate and getting us focused around a much more mature discussion around the fullness of our industry. And I think the medium-term focus for us is really Asia, as well as maintaining our presence in those great traditional markets of the UK, Europe and the Americas. And the next phase of marketing, world's best message, there's nothing like Australia, and a really strong continued focus on the digital and social media space. Thanks very much.